We are walking epistles. We are the walking story of God unfolding in the world. We are the ones that created. We are the ones that bring justice into the world. When he talks about how we are the body of Christ, he's not talking about the church as an institution, but he's talking about embodying divinity in such a way that everywhere that we step foot, everywhere that we go, the like justice happens, that we are fighting for justice, that we are inviting people into wholeness and healing and creating safety for them. So where all of these people that were co-opting and using narratives that were Jewish narratives to be able to justify their behavior, where they tapped into the divine? No, they were tapped into their trauma and their insecurities and their societal conditioning, which happens to all of us. And that's when people say you cannot trust, a lot of toxic Christianity says you cannot trust your emotions. It's misunderstanding a lot of things that are in the Bible, that it doesn't say that you cannot trust any of your emotions. In fact, your emotions are what inform you of what is happening inside of you. I think that what we have to consider is, am I acting out of trauma? Am I acting out of societal conditioning? Am I acting out of insecurities? Or am I acting out of my true self, the one tapped into divinity?
And this is why, like, the conversation of mental health is super important, especially if you're going to tap into that, I would say that divine version of yourself. Because for you to tap into the divine version of yourself, you have to acknowledge the parts you are not divine. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
To reach a certain level of inner beauty, you gotta address some of the ugly. And some of the ugly is not exactly so much ugly. It's just, I always tell people, I don't know what a negative emotion is.
Right.
I just don't. Even fear.
Right.
Jesus himself felt fear. He felt everything that we felt as people. You can't trust your emotions. Your emotions are indicators. How are we supposed to know that? How are we supposed to know Jesus was sad just off of Jesus wept when Lazarus died? Well, he had to have experienced some sense of sadness to express emotions. It was an involuntary response to the certain circumstances that were taking place. And when we're talking about, especially when it comes to tapping into your divine version of yourself, like whatever God anybody prays to, you have to, I would say, like, there's a sense of cleansing that needs to happen. As a Buddhist who once considered himself a Christian, I appreciate her perspective. It sounds realistic and places accountability on the action of believers rather than the God. Oh yeah, absolutely. That's why I tell people God will do whatever he wants to do, whatever divine being we pray to. For me, it's the Trinity. For other people, it's Allah. It's I don't really know all the gods. I kind of just know my own. But I think for me, as far as living this life, that there's a sense of responsibility. Unless I wouldn't really be here. I wouldn't even have my own brain or emotions if I wasn't supposed to have my own thoughts, feelings, and opinions on certain things. But it's definitely, there's something that you said there, and I was curious because I never heard anybody put it that way, is when people, that they are responding out of a sense of trauma. I've never heard anybody put it like that. Would you mind expanding on that a little bit, my sister, what you meant by that?
I mean, just think about, like, we can start at why Christianity accepted the terms of the Roman Empire. And if there is, like, the only reason they accepted the terms of the Roman Empire was the trauma that they had been subjected to for the last 300 years or 400 years. They had been burned, crucified, murdered in horrific ways. And then here comes power and says, hey, we want to make you the official religion now, which means that anybody that is not a Christian is going to be treated the way that you've been treated for the last 400 years, but you will no longer be treated that way. Do you accept? And they went, yeah, totally. And that was not a response from the most authentic self, it was a response out of, we don't want to be murdered anymore. We've experienced 400 years of horrific persecution. We don't want to do that anymore. So their response was a response out of trauma, and that's why oppression continues to happen, right? Because traumatized people that don't have the tools or whatever it is to heal or don't want to heal, continue to play into oppression, continue to trade power for healing. Instead of healing, they say, well, I'm giving power here, I'm being given power here, and perhaps if I'm powerful enough, I won't hurt anymore, and I think that I won't hurt anybody else. But power always corrupts, and power always means that somebody's being hurt. So that's what you see when white women got their right to vote. White women got the right to vote, not because they were fighting as feminists, but because they became just as patriarchal as white men. So they looked at white men and said, "We want the right to vote."
Oh,
And the
no,
reason
you
why we
did
can
it.
prove that
No,
we
you
can prove
didn't.
to you that we can get the right to vote is because we are not like those black women and those brown women. We are not like them. So give us the right to vote because we are the civilized ones. We learned from patriarchy how to be good women. And in fact, we will travel around the country and teach Black and Indigenous women how to behave as appropriate women inside of this patriarchy if you give us the vote. And so they did.
Ooh.
So, and was that a response to their own trauma? Absolutely. So when you respond out of trauma and hold on to power, you are going to end up hurting somebody else. It always happens. So that's where the question matters so much, right? Am I doing this out of my own trauma because I want to be safe? And this is happening today. You have a lot of people that are using capitalism as a way to stay away from their own marginalization, which is valid. I'm not saying it's not valid. But if your desire is to become a billionaire, your racial identity first is not going to protect you from white supremacy. The money is not going to protect you from white supremacy. And second, you being a billionaire means that you are now an oppressor. So you can be a billionaire of color. You're just trading weapons. You just want to be a weapon. So that's why I tell people you can deconstruct all the things that you want to deconstruct everything. Ask all the questions that you want to ask. But if you stop at deconstruction and not move into decolonizing, which means asking the questions about oppression and asking the questions about how am I a colonizer, what parts of me have been colonized so that I've become a colonizer, then you will continue to cause harm. If you're not divesting from power, if you're not aware of systems of oppression, you just don't believe in God. You just have deconstructed a lot of ideas of God, which is good. But you are now an atheist causing harm.
Whew.
The response is trauma. I was told by an atheist. He looked at me and he goes, "Do you think that he thought I was a progressive Christian? I'm not." He said, "Do you think that progressive Christianity is just a step toward atheism? Like you're going to continue to evolve and become an atheist?" And I was like, "Do you hear the supremacy in your question?
Mm.
Do you hear it? Because I do. Do you hear the supremacy? You sound exactly like evangelicals. Are
Whew.
you going to evolve and become like me? No, no. I will never stop believing in divinity. Never. Never. I'll never. Do I not believe in God as a being? Yes. So to some respects, I am an atheist, but I'm not. I believe in divinity. So if we are only saying, I don't want to be harmed anymore, but we don't recognize that we can be also the people that's why I like Vision, right? Because Vision makes that. He says, I have the power to become the abuser too. Inside of me is everything that is inside of every single person because we have the same nervous systems inside of us, and we can become the oppressor if we don't learn to listen to the most marginalized. That's why it is more likely for people that are one level separated from power, so white women, sometimes men of color, cisgender heterosexual men of color, or white cisgender heterosexual women, to become oppressors because they only have to do this one little. If only they were men, if only they were white, then they would have power. And that is a trauma response. But it's very, very, very rare to see Black trans immigrant woman trade power because she's experienced so much oppression she doesn't want anybody else to experience it, because her trauma has been the only experience she's had. She's never tasted power. So we have to question ourselves and say, am I here fighting for equality and liberation for all? Or am I fighting to minimize the oppression I'm under? And those are two very different journeys, and they yield very different results too. So trauma yields more oppression. The it just changes your role in that oppression. But moving out of divinity yields liberation and equality, equity.
So let me get in my nerd bag for a second.
Mhm.
So I did this Bible study earlier this year after, I'm not even kidding, after watching Black Panther. And I was talking about I was watching Killmonger, for instance. Killmonger was this dad, was first generation from Wakanda, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You know, came over to America, set up home in America. Killmonger's dad dies. He's killed by, you know, Wakanda principles and everything like that. So what happens to Killmonger, or Eric Killmonger, or whatever? I can't remember his actual last name in the movie. But Michael B. Jordan's character, essentially.
Yes,
you know,
yes.
With all the bumps. That still freaks me out. I don't like the bumps. Ugh. But you know, he went to school, he got into MIT, he joined the military, and he ended up equipping himself in certain ways that was able to put him to ascend himself to a certain like level and stature that he ended up becoming the oppressor. Right. And I always tell people, be careful trying to, not so much like, you know, liberate yourself. Absolutely. You know what I'm saying? I'm all for that. But when you just stop at you or people that come from your circumstances, it's very easy for you to become the very thing you hate, which is the oppressor. He became the weapon, as you described it. He became the very thing, and we're talking about, I don't know if we could call like what he was doing necessarily in that movie colonization, but the minute he was able to have the technology, the resources, and the military forces as far as back goes, he was in that seat. But it was that, if only I could remove this, that's very easy. So yeah, I definitely agree with that for sure.
Yeah.
For sure.
And you know, a lot of these narratives are in the Bible. That's why people are like, the Bible is just nonsense, blah, 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 blah. And I'm like, no, it's beautiful. If you are able to read it properly, if you are able to understand that this is an ancient book where ancient people were leaving their wisdom to us in it, it's beautiful. Because it talks there about revenge, and when it says revenge is of the Lord, I don't think that it's talking about don't ever fight for justice, which is what we are taught, right? Like, don't, if somebody wrongs you, just don't do, because that's grooming, that's predatory theology. If somebody wrongs you, don't do anything. Nope, that's not what it's saying. What it's saying is, don't be so consumed by revenge. Revenge will be of the Lord's. Be consumed with wholeness. Be the most whole, healed person that you can be. And out of that, make decisions. Because if you're making decisions just to vindicate yourself, you're going to end up becoming the oppressor. That is not something that comes out of the healed self. It comes out of the very wounded self, which is understandable. You know, no, there is no victim blaming here or judgment toward people that are trying to keep themselves safe. However, we don't want to cause harm anymore. And if we don't want to cause harm anymore, that means that we have to question and consider the ways in which we are capable of harm, and the ways in which we've been wounded. And so we carry all of this trauma, and that causes us to become traumatizers now. That's a new word.
Like Hitmonchan, GV, that's my clan. I abuse ya. I'm that Kaya Super with them kicks like Hayabusa. While I snap the neck of a Satan while he nod his head to this music. We the movement, good vibes sent by God. We the truest.